It's Sunday. That means it's time for a shed talk. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Jam Shed and this week's episode of Shed Talk. I've got several things that I'd like to accomplish in our video today, so let's talk about it. First, I want to talk about the Karnivore. Second, I want to revisit some of the things after having an opportunity to watch the Shootout video that I did between the Celestion Vintage 30 and the Celestion G12H Anniversary Series speaker. And then lastly, I just want to talk about some things that have dropped in my feed that are inspiring some of these videos and some of the thinking I have at the table around how we hear tone and perceive tone, specifically 4x12 cabs, single 12 cabs, and 2x12 cabs. I want to talk just a little bit about that and some of the things that have been coming up my feed. So, without further delay, let's jump right into it and talk about the Karnivore speaker. I was so jazzed up to get this video shot and drop it with the release and all the rest of it. And hey, sometimes things just don't work out the way we want them to. And for those of you that gave me grace here as I wait for the next two to come, which hopefully they'll be here this week. Certainly I'm going to look to get something out as soon as I can. It could be this upcoming weekend or the following week. We'll see how the schedule works out to get that done. A lot of you were wondering, well, what was the imperfections that you were experiencing? Essentially, on the speaker, I noticed right away when I was dialing them in, I had lights on there so I could get the mic positioning done just perfectly. And I noticed that there was a little bit of separation around the surround, so the foam that was on there. And I didn't want to power that speaker up and run it knowing that there's some separation there, because it would have ultimately done more damage and it wouldn't have captured the spirit of the full power that the speaker had. And I just didn't want to have any imperfections. One, because I know the brand is amazing, and that's not a knock on them. I think this could have happened in shipping. It could have happened a number of different ways. And so it was more so I just wanted to be thinking mostly about the experience you are going to get and then being respectful of the brand. I do like Eminent speakers. This is not me trying to sequester any non-judgment or judgment from the company by being honest about what happened. It was just a simple imperfection. Nothing to be of concern, nothing I was deeply concerned about as far as understanding that this happens. It's a brand new speaker. They're manufacturing all the rest of it. That stuff can happen. It could have happened in shipping. It could have got jostled. There's a number of reasons why that speaker could have had this imperfection, but I didn't want to put it out there for you all and not give the best experience putting that speaker forward. Plus, it's a signature speaker of someone I deeply respect, and I wanted to make sure that I was representing that well. And so that's the lion's share of that. Hopefully that video will drop this weekend or the following week sometime. No guarantees on that. We'll just, once it gets here, I'll drop in for a quick note and we'll move that forward. All right, segueing to the second topic I wanted to discuss, which was this week's grudge match. And I shifted. I was doing pedal videos a lot and I was inspired by the Karnivore. I knew I wanted to level that Karnivore video up, even though we're still talking about the Karnivore, but I wanted to level that video up. And I think we accomplished that with this, I will call it a test pilot of how I might be executing these speaker shootouts. I had a comment that I read this morning. Someone said, well, how do you plan to shoot them out? And of course, please go back and check out the video I shot between the G12H and the Vintage 30. I think that's a great representation on how I'm going to do this going forward. Now, I will be completely honest. There was a ton of work that went into that. I built a cabinet. I put together a jam that we'll use to do the shootouts going forward, and then all of the wiring to make all of this stuff interface well with the studio gear versus the channel gear. They're very different systems, and so it was a fun exercise in audio hoop jumping to make all of these things work well together. But at the end, I was very happy with how that turned out. And if you hadn't had a chance to check out that video, go check out the Shootout. It'll really give you a good idea of how I'm going to manage the Karnivore. Certainly we'll do some tweaks and certainly enjoyed hearing the differences. And that's what spurred the third thing I want to talk a little bit about, which is the tonal differences. And so the third topic was cabinets and how are we grabbing tone and what really matters in that signal chain. And I've been getting a ton of things in my feed, specifically microphones. And I'd be lying if I didn't say this. I have been 100% gassing over getting a Royer 121 microphone. In my mind, my gear acquisition syndrome brain says, must have that microphone to complete the microphone locker. And I know that's not true, but my curiosity was superseding me this week. So I was down a rabbit hole, and of course I'm getting the feeds and I'm getting offers and all the rest of it. And I started thinking about, well, I already have a ribbon mic, and maybe for another shootout, maybe we'll do the vintage 30 and we'll do the G12H again with it's an MXL ribbon mic. I think it's the R40. I have a ribbon mic, so yeah, we could totally do something like that, and then compare it to something that I have in the mic locker, such as an SM57, or maybe we do the SM7, or maybe we look at doing maybe a C414, just having some fun with that. So that got me churning down this rabbit hole about a video I watched last week that Christian Cola released with Cola Audio Cult. If you've not seen it, he shoots out a 2x12, a 4x12, and a 6x12, which is absolutely bonkers. It's a lot of air moving. And he also chimed in on the Karnivore video that I shot that was just kind of describing the journey, and said, hey, put it in a 2x12, especially in the upper slanted area, and you'll get tons of low end. And I thought, yeah, that's the level up we needed for the video, and that's exactly the tip I was looking for. But after watching his video, it also made me think about, well, how much does the cab play into the overall tone versus the microphone versus the speaker itself? So here's what I found. Based on our shootout, and having listened to the 4x12 versus a 1x12 and the 2x12, I think Christian's video does an excellent job noting the tonal differences. For those of you that are using these in the studio, I don't know that it matters as much because of how you're going to space for that specific song. And I'm being specific when I'm saying that, because depending on what the song is, the style of the song, you might want more of that low end. You might not for others. You need to leave room in the frequency spectrum so that you're not dominating all of the guitar sound, is not dominating all of that sonic space, because it is a ton of sonic space captured when you're talking about high gain recordings. Now, again, if you're doing Edge of Breakup or maybe classic rock or hard rock, you do lighten up that distortion a little bit, which opens up the spectrum. So then maybe the nuances you get out of the cab make a much greater difference. But clearly in his video, you can hear the difference. And I think there's merit to that. But again, in a specific studio situation, oftentimes we're taking the low end out anyway. You know, you're doing a cut. And that happens because you need to make the sonic space room. I'm not laboring that any further, but the reason why I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because from my perspective, you need to have a decent preamp. You don't need to have the most expensive preamp, but you need to have a decent preamp, one that has a good floor noise, one that has a good signal ratio, that it can do the thing. It doesn't need to be incredibly expensive. In fact, I will say that I've had this one preamp that I need to dig out, but it's a Natty PRA8. And I thought those were great. I still have one. I just haven't used it in years. I need to dig that out and do a shed bench or do a shootout or something with that. I need to actually get maybe that's a good video. Maybe I'll do some preamp shootouts. That would be kind of fun. I've got a couple different ones here. Nothing too crazy or expensive, but maybe there's some inherent differences we hear miking a cab versus one or the other. Now, again, so the signal chain is often very simple. You have the amplifier. You're going from the amplifier to a speaker. That's the biggest filter. I think we can all agree that from the last test, when you heard the difference between the G12 versus the vintage 30, totally different. I mean, but not far outside of the same family. You could tell that it could do the gain thing. So I think the speaker is still the most important, but then what's the next part of that signal chain? You've got the microphone, the preamp, and then conversion. I think we can say in 2025, the conversion debate is non-existent. I mean, converters are great. From your budget all the way up to the most high-end, conversion is well done. I think you can get it done with any type of converter that's being produced in the modern era, at least within the last 3 to 5 years. So that being said, circling back to why I was ruminating on this whole tone picture based on the video I dropped yesterday, is that, well, really, how much does a cab play into this? Because I'm, again, not going to lie. We've talked about, I've been gassing about a Royer 121. And those of you who've had experience with that mic and compared it to some counterparts, I would love to have you comment down in the viewers comment section about that. If you know, I mean, I know there's other releases. There's another ribbon mic by Royer. I cannot remember. Maybe it's a Royer 10. I don't remember, R10. Maybe that's what it's called. That's a little more budget friendly. But again, it would be awesome to know from your perspectives down in the comments, what have you experimented with on the high end and the low end when it comes to ribbon mics and mic in a cab, and did you see much of a difference? Because that is my fear. I'll part ways with all of my money to get a Royer 121, which they're incredibly expensive. Even on the used market, they're expensive. And just to find out that maybe my MXL R40 isn't that far away with a couple EQ tweaks. But I wouldn't know that until I get one in my hands. And so maybe someday that happens. I'm not going to make that jump here right now, but who knows? Maybe the future of this channel will be able to do that, and that could be a fun shootout. But for those of you that have a Royer 121 and maybe some of these other more budget-friendly microphones, maybe you can weigh in here and let me know. What have you found? What is the truth to that? And so with the feed portion, that again is the marketing machine, we'll call it, had me thinking about cabs and how much they actually play in the sonic space. And so where that comes in specifically is the signal chain. When I did these videos, this video last week, I shot it in 1x12 cabs that I personally built because I wanted to make sure that they were very close. It wasn't about high fidelity scientific testing. It was more about ease. And the way I set those up is basically, it is truly a separated 2x12 cabinet. So you can plug an extension speaker into it and it's going to split your ohms. So I have to run 16 ohms speakers in those cabinets, because when you put them together, when you daisy chain them or hook up the extension speaker, it's going to split that load in half, which is going to give it an 8 ohm load. And you don't want to mismatch loading. And so for our shoot up purposes going forward, those speakers will all be between 16 and 15 ohm, because we want to make sure we're in that safe zone for an 8 ohm load coming from the amplifier. Sorry about all that technical, but I chose to do it that way because I wanted the separation of the cabs, so I didn't have to deal with any phasing. I put those mic booms on there because I wanted the ability to really dial in. And so for example, if I wanted to use either one of them and swap a speaker in that particular cab and get the positioning exactly correct, I could do that with ease. And that was the whole purpose of adding the second, so that I can do this real time, A, being for you guys while I'm shooting the video, and then secondarily, I can then go into the studio gear and I can record a jam, and I can use those same exact cabs in that same exact format with the same microphones and not have a change. And that was one other topic I wanted to discuss for a second about the video, which was the microphones. The SM57s that I use were virtually matched. They're almost identical. They differed ever so slightly, but not enough that you're gonna hear a major difference. Obviously, when you're listening to a speaker versus another speaker, again, I wasn't going for perfect fidelity here, but it's close enough. It's close enough to say that these things are distinctly different. So circling back to the main thing, when I said cabs, I have been on the hunt for a cabinet just to finish a project that I've wanted. You know, we all have those things in our mind from when we were kids that we wanted. For me, it was these rectifiers, and it was also another amplifier and a cabinet. And that one cabinet that I've never owned that I would like to. And by the way, I have cabinets that are almost exact spec, so I know it's not going to change the tones that I have in the studio. And this is the cool thing about the journey, is when you make it there, you have all these other things that inform what you know to be true. But the cabinet I am ruminating on, and that was deep in my feeds, is an orange 4x12 cab. The current modern production is a PPC 412, and they're incredibly expensive. I'm sure they're awesome. I don't need more vintage 30s in my life, but I'm hoping someday I'll be able to find, let's say, a 90s era version of that cab. It doesn't have to be the PPC, but one from the 90s is what I'm looking for, and that someday I'm sure I'll stumble upon one. But these were things that I was researching. Of course, my feed gets dumped with all of these different cabinets, and it sent me down a rabbit hole to look at, you know, ones that are, what is the difference between the Orange Crush Pro versus the PPC versus the ones that were made in the 90s versus the ones that were made prior to that. And there's this lull in Orange's history. So it was just a fun rabbit hole to go down. But the question I would pose to you is, what do you think the most important part in the signal chain is? I have my theories on that. Now, one thing I want to be clear about, the most important part is the you in it. You will always sound like you. And so for those of you that were ready to hit the keys and say the player is, let me say it ahead of you. And I'd say secondarily to that, the amps should have a range. And if you're looking for high gain, get something in the high gain range and make sure it has a similar range to something. So, you know, think about these. A 5150 would work. You know, you could get a 6505, that would work. You could get a modern 3-channel rectifier, that would work. I mean, there are so many high gain amplifiers out there that are reasonable, that are in this range, and can get you there. And so I would say as long as the amplifier is in the range, that's an important part, but I don't know that it's the most important part. Some would say the pickups and the guitar, I think there's some merit to that, but not to the degree that the speaker changes that. And while this has been said and unpacked many times, I think the video I shot echoes that really well. But my curiosity is around, hey, listen, sometimes we just need to be inspired by experience, and that is gear acquisition syndrome at its best. You know, when we're thinking that we need this thing, I know I don't need an orange cab in my life, but I want one because it's something that I aspire to want in my playing journey. I was inspired by a band that they had the specific rig, and I want to have that rig, and someday I will, but my sense of urgency to do it isn't high. I'm bringing that here with you to say, that's the rabbit hole I was down, that's what I was researching, and where are you at with that? Is there a cab that you are saying, hey, maybe it's an Engel 4x12, that's the quintessential cab? Is it the Marshall 1960A with vintage 30s, or 1960 cab with vintage 30s? Is it a Mesa Boogie oversized cab? Is it you want to build your own? I'm curious what is inspiring you around the cab game. But then the last point I would make is I don't know that the cab makes the largest difference when it comes to your tone. I think we can agree, and if we don't, and we don't have to agree, by the way, I'm not telling you how you should think, but I think the speaker is most important. And so with that being said, I'm also curious about what speakers you're digging. Is it a DV77 by Eminence, or is it a hempback, or a creamback, or a greenback, or is it just the vintage 30? I would love to hear from you all about what your favorite filter is that makes the largest impact on your tone. And what do you have it loaded in? Is it a 4x12, a 1x12, 2x12, 6x12 if you're Christian or you're lucky to have built one? I think those are all things that are fascinating. And really, realistically, I just wanted to have that conversation with y'all to share, hey, this is what's on my mind. I think there's some inherent next steps, and I'll finish with this here, that I would like to do more speaker shootouts, and I've got several in here. So if you had any recommendations of things that I should check out, I have a laundry list of speakers in here already, such as greenbacks. I don't have a creamback, but I've got a bunch of other, outside of vintage 30s, I've got a Patriot, I think, by Eminence. I've got the Governor Redcoat by Eminence. So I've got a few other things that I can drop. I've got some limited run speakers in here that are kind of cool that I purchased just one off. I didn't even know that they were rare. So what recommendations would you make? Leave it in the comments. I think the next one I'd really like to explore is I'd like to check out the hempback. I'm very curious about what that sounds like. So if that's something you're interested in, you have one, let me know what it sounds like. All right, talked enough. This was a great time. I hope you enjoyed our Shed Talk today. Please, we are a community, a respectful community. Feel free to leave comments down below about what your mileage is like across these topics. Those of you who've got the Karnivore and you've had a chance to get it in, several of you commented. I picked up 2, and I'm waiting to get them loaded into my cabinet, and I'm wondering if you got there or not. So if you already have them and you're hearing them, I'd love to hear how that's going. And so we'll get that video out soon. Look for an update maybe this week. I don't know if I'll have a video out midweek. We'll see. The schedule's getting a little busy here. Plus, there's been a lot of time spent getting this launched, and so we want to be a good steward of all of our time. And with that being said, you guys have been amazing partners in this journey around curating this channel and seeing this thing grow. We're at 42 subscribers. I can't wait. I mean, we're probably, well, I shouldn't say this. Maybe this is a little preemptive, I guess, but we're on our way to almost 100 subscribers, and that is so cool to me. And while I am not here to ask you for your subscription, I'm just here to give you a thanks for joining me on this journey and today's Shed Talk, and I will see you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.